In the great and terrible storm of the Second World War, where every nation strained its sinews and every citizen was drawn into service, there emerged a group of flyers whose courage didn't roar in the skies of battle. But who kept those battles in the sky in the first place? They weren't combat pilots, they didn't drop bombs, and they didn't shoot down enemy planes. But without them, Britain's aerial defense and eventually its victory would have faltered. This is the story of the Air Transport Auxiliary, a band of civilian aviators who defied age, gender, and danger to deliver the very wings of war. At the outbreak of World War II in 1939, the British military was rapidly expanding, scrambling to meet the demands of modern aerial warfare. The Royal Air Force, already overstretched, couldn't afford to tie up trained combat pilots with logistical tasks, especially not ferrying aircraft from factories to frontline squadrons or repair depots. It was clear that a solution was needed, one that could free up trained RAF personnel for direct combat, while still ensuring the constant, reliable movement of aircraft across the country. And so, the Air Transport Auxiliary was born. Conceived as a civilian organization under the Ministry of Aircraft Production, the ATA officially took flight on February 15, 1940. Its mission: to ferry military aircraft of all kinds, fighters, bombers, and trainers from one location to another within Britain and eventually across the Channel into active war zones. What set the ATA apart was not merely its function, but the extraordinary makeup of its personnel. The RAF had strict standards: perfect health, narrow age ranges, a demand for military discipline and uniformity. But the ATA broke that mold wide open. Their pilots were too old or too young for military service. Some were partially disabled, missing limbs, eyesight in only one eye, even those with limited mobility. Many were foreigners, arriving from over 25 different nations, including the United States, Canada, Poland, South Africa, and Australia. And significantly, the ATA became one of the first military-adjacent British organizations to hire women as pilots. This was revolutionary. In an era where women weren't even permitted to fly for combat or commercial airlines, the ATA put them in the cockpits of Britain's most powerful warplanes. Led by Pauline Gower, a trailblazing pilot in her own right, the women's section of the ATA was formed in 1940. And while they were initially limited to lighter aircraft, over time the barriers fell. By 1943, female pilots were flying Spitfires, Hurricanes, and even the massive Avro Lancaster bombers. One of the ATA's most famous members was Amy Johnson, a pioneering female aviator and national hero. She joined the ATA in 1940 and served valiantly until her tragic death in service in January 1941 when her aircraft went down over the Thames estuary. Imagine this: you're handed an envelope with your flight orders. Inside, no detailed briefings, no radio contact, and often no familiarity with the aircraft you're about to fly. Just a basic pilot's notes manual. You climb into a brand new Spitfire, perhaps the first and only time you'll ever fly one. You've never trained on it. You read the specs, memorized the control layout, check the weather, and take off. That was the routine. That was the job. ATA pilots flew by the book, literally. Their flying Bible, the ferry pilot's notes, gave condensed instructions on how to take off, fly, and land each of the 147 aircraft types they might be called upon to handle. From the tiny Tiger Moth to the lumbering Halifax, they were expected to adapt quickly and without complaint. They flew without instruments, without radios, without navigational aids. And they did it in all weather conditions: fog, wind, snow, and enemy airspace. Wartime blackouts made night landings hazardous, and mistakes were unforgiving. Over the course of the war, the ATA delivered over 300,000 aircraft, a staggering logistical achievement. But the price was high. By war's end, 173 ATA members had lost their lives in the line of duty. And yet, because they weren't combatants, their deaths were often overlooked, buried in the footnotes of war. The ATA never asked for glory. They didn't wear uniforms emblazoned with medals. Their mission wasn't conquest, it was service. In 1943, the British government finally recognized the equal contribution of women ATA pilots by granting them the same pay as men, a groundbreaking moment as it marked the first time in British history that women received equal pay in a government job. Their legacy lives on not only in aviation history, but in the broader story of equality, resilience, and quiet heroism. These were people who knew the war depended not just on bold attacks, but on every link in the chain of effort. The ATA was that link, a living bridge between factory and front line, between production and power. So the next time you hear the roar of a restored Spitfire flying overhead, remember not just the battles it fought, but the hands that delivered it. Remember the ATA, the civilians who flew like warriors, who served without fighting and whose courage helped win the war. For more stories of overlooked heroes and wartime resilience, stay tuned.